The sun hung low over the orange horizon of Dust Helm, casting long shadows over the cracked earth. Jackson Kane, a rugged cowboy with a weathered hat and a heart full of grit, rode into town after weeks of cattle herding in the southern plains. His horse, Dusty, trotted slow but steady, its hooves raising tiny clouds from the dry ground. Jackson was eager to get home. His father, Elias Kane, was the only family he had left. A man of wisdom and silence, Elias had raised Jackson alone after the sea took his mother. Their home stood at the edge of the desert, a small wooden house with a windmill and a porch where Elias used to sit, carving birds from driftwood. But today, something was wrong. As Jackson neared the house, Dusty stopped abruptly, snorting. The air was still, too still. No sound of the windmill creaking, no scent of stew from the chimney, no barking from the neighbor's dog. "Pa?" Jackson called out as he tied the reins and stepped onto the porch. Silence. He pushed the door open. The smell of old wood and salt water filled his nose, odd given how far they were from the sea. The living room was untouched, but cold. The carving knife lay on the floor, the last bird unfinished on the table. And then he saw it. In the middle of the kitchen stood a statue. It was Elias, frozen in place, reaching toward the window as if trying to flee. His eyes wide with fear, skin turned to gray stone, a solid statue from head to toe. Jackson staggered back. No, 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 no. He rushed forward, touched the statue's hand. It was cold, hard, lifeless. But tears welled in Jackson's eyes, not just from grief, but recognition. He had seen this before. Years ago, in an old sailor's journal, a tale about a witch from the sea who could turn men to stone with a single spell. Her name was Morvana. Jackson's heart raced as he searched the house for clues, and on Elias's workbench, beneath a wooden chest, he found a map, worn, water-stained, and inked with strange markings. At the bottom corner, written in his father's script, "Find the Luminofen. Its pearl can undo her curse." The Luminofen, a myth. A glowing fish said to live in the deep waters of the Sea of Thalmarin. Inside it, a radiant pearl known to possess the power of restoration. The legends claim that only those brave enough to cross the monster-infested waters, pass through forgotten islands, and face the dead themselves could ever hope to find it. Most called it a bedtime tale, but Jackson knew better. If Elias believed it was real, then it was, and he had no choice but to believe too. He stayed the night beside the statue of his father, unable to sleep. By morning, the decision was made. He would go to the sea, find the Luminofen, and return with the pearl that could bring Elias back. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed a crew. First, he rode west, across the burning flats, to the riverside outpost where Boone Ryder worked as a mercenary. Boone, wild-eyed and grinning, had fists like bricks and a heart loyal to the grave. When Jackson told him about Elias and the pearl, Boone simply loaded his rifle and said, "Well, I never liked witches anyhow." Next, they found Ilara Quinn in a dusty port town. A brilliant navigator and fearless sailor, she'd mapped the eastern storms before she was 16. "You're looking for a fish that glows and swims with legends?" she said. "I'm in." Finally, they tracked down Otis Crow, a brooding sailor who had once captained a ship through ghost waters. No one knew where he came from, but some whispered he had escaped the clutches of Morvana herself. When he heard the name Luminofen, he merely nodded and said, "You'll need someone who's been close to death. I'm your man." With his crew assembled, Jackson stood at the edge of the docks in Black Rock Port, gazing at the endless ocean. He clenched his father's map in his hand. "This is for you, Pa." he whispered. And with that, he stepped aboard the ship they had chartered, the Hollow Star, its sails creaking, ready to carry them toward the unknown. The journey had begun. The sea awaited, and deep within its heart, a glowing fish carried the one thing that could save his father. But the sea would not give it easily.
"Wind's picking up," she warned, scanning the horizon with her spyglass. "Too early for storm season. Something's wrong." Within an hour, waves began to rise, slapping against the ship's hull like angry fists. The sky turned iron gray, and rain began to spit. The crew scrambled as Alara took the wheel and shouted instructions. "This isn't natural," she yelled over the roar of the wind. "Look at the compass." Jackson looked. The needle spun wildly. "That's sea magic," Otis said, tying down a sail. "The witch knows we're coming." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air as a wave slammed over the deck, tossing Boone into a pile of barrels. Jackson ran to help, grabbing a rope to steady himself. Then, out of the mist, a shape emerged. Massive, coiling, slithering just beneath the waves. "Something's under us!" Alara shouted. Before they could react, a long, scaly tail whipped up from the ocean and smashed against the side of the ship, sending crates flying. A serpentine head rose next, eyes glowing like blue fire, fangs as long as spears. It was a sea creature of legend, a Drakmaran eel, guardian of the reef. The crew readied weapons, but it was Boone who roared and leapt forward with a harpoon, striking the beast in the neck. It screeched, a terrible sound that seemed to shake the sky itself, and dove back into the sea. "Hold on!" Jackson yelled. "Steer toward the reef! It's guarding the edge. We need to break through." Alara turned the wheel hard. The ship swerved between sharp coral peaks, rising from the sea like dragon teeth. The eel rose again for one final strike, its jaws wide. Jackson threw the carving knife. It spun through the air and struck the creature's eye. The beast howled, crashing back into the depths, sending a towering wave over the deck. But this time the Hollow Star burst through the reef, sailing free into the open sea beyond. The water calmed, the mist cleared, and there, ahead of them, stretched the vast, glittering surface of the Sea of Thelvarin. They had crossed the first barrier. Boone wiped blood from his brow. "If that was the welcome party, I can't wait to meet the neighbors." Jackson stared ahead, the wind tugging at his coat, his eyes steady. "We're coming, Luminifin," he whispered. The sea beyond the reef of Drakmar was eerily calm. Not a single wave rolled across the surface. The Hollow Star creaked with every movement, as if whispering a warning. The sun had vanished behind a heavy veil of clouds, turning the sky a pale silver. It was midday, but the light felt like twilight. Jackson Kane stood at the bow, his eyes fixed on the unnatural stillness ahead. "It's too quiet," he muttered. Alara Quinn nodded, studying the horizon through her spyglass. "No wind, no birds, no sound. That's not peace, it's silence. Forced silence." Otis Crow emerged from below deck, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "We've entered the Whispering Belt. Sailors say it's where the sea holds its breath." Boone Ryder leaned on the railing, scanning the flat waters. "Well, the sea better start talking again. We're not going anywhere without wind." The sails hung limp, useless. For the first time in days, the Hollow Star drifted slowly, pulled by only the faintest current. The compass still spun erratically, and the stars remained hidden. "What now?" Boone asked. "We row," Jackson said firmly. "We row until we're out of this dead zone." They tied oars to the ship's long sides and took turns rowing, 2 at a time, hour by hour. The water around them shimmered like glass, reflecting twisted images of the crew that seemed almost distorted. By nightfall, Ilara's voice echoed from the crow's nest. "Lights! Dead ahead!" Jackson grabbed the spyglass and looked.
In the distance, strange orbs of blue and green floated above the sea, some small like fireflies, others large like lanterns. They moved gently, as if dancing on the wind, though the air was still. "Will of the sea," Otis muttered darkly. "Spirits, or something worse." "We go around them," Ilara advised. But Boone stepped forward, squinting. "Wait, look there. Isn't that a person?" Jackson looked again. Sure enough, amidst the lights floated what looked like a boat, and on it a woman in a flowing white dress, waving at them. "Help me," her voice carried, sweet and soft, unnatural in its clarity. "My ship is broken. I'm alone." Jackson's grip tightened on the spyglass. Something felt wrong. The woman's face didn't move. Her mouth was open, but her eyes didn't blink. "She's not real," he said. "It's a trap." Boone squinted again. "Are you sure? What if she's really in trouble?" Before they could argue further, the woman let out a sharp, unnatural cry. Her form flickered like a candle in the wind, then split into 3 copies, then 5, then 10. Dozens of identical women in white dresses now floated ahead, each calling out with the same voice, "Help me! Please save me!" And then their mouths widened. Too wide, too sharp. Their cries turned to screeches. "Sirens!" Ilara screamed. "Hard port! Sound the bell!" Otis rang the warning bell as Jackson yanked the wheel. The hollow star turned just as one of the illusions lunged forward, revealing rows of jagged teeth and glowing lidless eyes. The ship shook as ghostly tendrils of mist reached out from the water, grabbing the hull like hands. "Get the salt bags!" Otis shouted. Boone and Ilara grabbed canvas pouches filled with sea salt and tossed them overboard. Where the salt touched water, the mist hissed and burned away.
Jackson drew his revolver, even though bullets wouldn't stop ghosts. But still, he fired into the mist, buying moments for the others. Then Otis stepped forward with something wrapped in leather, an old sea horn carved from a beast's tooth. He blew it. The deep, mournful note echoed over the sea. The sirens screamed, flickered, and began to dissolve. One by one, the illusions fell back into the sea and vanished, the orbs of light snuffing out. Silence returned. Breathing hard, Jackson leaned on the wheel. "Everyone okay?" "Still got my limbs," Boone grunted. "Heart's racing," Ilara whispered, eyes wide. "That was no normal sea magic," Otis said grimly. "Morvana knows we're here. That was her doing." They took turns sleeping in shifts that night, afraid to let the sea catch them unaware again. By dawn, the mist had lifted slightly. Ilara plotted a new course using the ancient map. "We're getting close," she said. "The coral cavern is next. If the legends are true, it holds the second piece of the path to Luminofen." Jackson rolled the map open again. A jagged spiral marked the coral cavern, with the words, "Within its heart, the pearl's glow begins." He traced the inked line with his finger. "We push forward, no matter what." Behind him, the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the hollow star. But the sea stayed quiet, and something was watching from below. The coral cavern lay just beyond the edge of the Whispering Belt, hidden beneath layers of jagged rock and swirling tide pools. According to the map, it was an underwater maze built by time and pressure, filled with glowing coral, ancient wreckage, and strange creatures that had never seen sunlight. But what worried Jackson Kane more than the cavern itself was the warning scrawled beside it in his father's handwriting. "Beware the guardian with 1,000 teeth." The hollow star reached the location by midday. The water shimmered in hues of violet and blue, and the surface danced with reflections that weren't from the sky. Ilara leaned over the edge, her hair trailing in the wind. "We're floating above it," she confirmed. "See those deep blue holes between the reef spires? That's where the cavern opens." Boone grunted, And how exactly are we supposed to go down there? Otis stepped forward with something wrapped in leather, an old sea horn carved from a beast's tooth. There's a narrow passage, just wide enough for a small diving bell or harness. I've done it before, but this time, we all need to go. Jackson nodded. We go as far as we can by ship, then drop anchor. Ilara and I will dive first. Boone, you and Otis guard the surface. If something goes wrong, pull us up. Ilara opened a leather pouch and unrolled several breathing tubes enchanted with a minor air charm, a gift from a sea-dwelling ally she'd once rescued. "One breath every minute," she warned. "No more." They lowered themselves slowly into the sea. The world below was like nothing Jackson had ever seen. Crimson coral towers rose like spires from the seafloor, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Shoals of translucent fish drifted past like ghosts. The water was warm, thick, and filled with flecks of glowing dust that floated like stars. They swam carefully through the entrance of the cavern, a narrow slit in the reef, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, the cavern widened, revealing massive stone columns wrapped in seaweed and coral that pulsed with light. At the center stood a pedestal, an altar carved from smooth black rock. On it, an orb hovered, glowing faintly. Not the pearl they were looking for, but something else. Jackson reached out. The water suddenly shivered. A deep, slow vibration echoed through the cavern, followed by a low growl. From behind the altar, something moved. A flash of scales, a glint of eyes. And then from the shadows, a massive creature slithered forward, its long serpentine body coiled in impossible directions, skin armored in patches of coral and bone. Its eyes were yellow, its mouth wide and circular, filled with rows and rows of teeth, more than 1,000. "The Guardian," Ilara whispered. The creature, known in legend as a fang-maw leviathan, roared through the water. The sound didn't reach their ears, but they felt it in their bones. It lunged. Jackson shoved Ilara aside and pulled a flare from his belt, striking it underwater. A burst of red light flared in front of the beast's face, stunning it for a moment. "Ilara, the orb!" he shouted, bubbles streaming from his mouth. She grabbed it from the pedestal just as the creature spun back towards them. Its tail whipped through the water, knocking Jackson against a stone column. His vision blurred. Then, harpoon! A long rope-bound harpoon shot down from above. Boone had fired it through the cavern's opening, hitting the creature's side. It howled, twisting and thrashing, as it retreated momentarily into the shadows. Jackson grabbed Ilara's hand and signaled upward. They kicked hard toward the light above. They broke the surface with a splash, gasping for breath. Boone and Otis pulled them up quickly, throwing salt around the ship's edge in case the creature followed. Ilara collapsed onto the deck, still clutching the glowing orb. We got it." Jackson sat beside her, chest heaving. "What is it?" She held it up. Inside the orb, swirling light formed a map, a shifting sea chart glowing with golden lines. "It's the second path," she whispered. "The one not shown on the surface map. A secret route. It'll lead us closer to Luminofen." Boone tied down the harpoon line. "What about the giant fish lizard thing? That dead?"
Otis shook his head. "No, just wounded, but it won't follow. The cavern is its prison. We disturbed it, and it let us live." Jackson looked at the water. The surface was still again, peaceful, but the knowledge in his hand was anything but. "We're getting closer," he said, "but so is danger." He looked at the orb, then at the sea stretching endlessly ahead. "This fish better be real," Boone muttered. Jackson stared into the horizon. "It has to be. My father's life depends on it." The hollow star pressed on through the open waters, guided now by the magical orb retrieved from the coral cavern. Ilara mounted it in a brass cradle near the helm, where it projected shimmering lines of golden light across the ship's wooden surface. The lines shifted every few hours, showing real-time currents, hidden dangers, and something else. Strange flickers that looked like shadows moving just below the surface. Jackson Kane studied the new map silently. Every step forward brought him closer to Luminafin and to his father's salvation. But the deeper they traveled into the Sea of Thalmarin, the more the ocean seemed alive with secrets. Boone leaned against the mast, chewing on a strip of dried meat. So we've outrun a sea eel, stared down some kind of coral snake with more teeth than sense, and dodged ghost ladies in dresses. What's next? Singing octopuses? I'd actually be interested in seeing that, Ilara muttered. But Otis's expression stayed grim. We're heading into the echo trenches. They're not on normal maps for a reason. Jackson turned. Echo trenches? A sunken canyon, twice as deep as the Great Drop, filled with forgotten wrecks. But it's not the depth that's dangerous. It's the sound. Every word, every footstep echoes down there. Some say it repeats things you haven't even said yet. Others claim it whispers your worst memories. Ilara frowned. Like a place haunted by voices. Otis nodded. And sometimes your own voice comes back to answer. They reached the trench by dusk. The water around them grew darker, not from lack of light, but from depth. The orb's light dimmed, flickering as if something unseen interfered. Jackson stepped to the bow. He could feel it, the pressure, the weight of silence. Then he heard it. His own voice, whispering from the sea. You failed him, Jackson. You let him turn to stone. Jackson froze. He spun around. No one was near him. Then again, soft, deep beneath the waves. You waited too long. He needed you. Boone suddenly grabbed his head. Who's shouting? I didn't do it. I swear, I didn't. Ilara turned pale. I hear my mother. She's calling me. Otis barked. Don't listen to it. It's the trench. It knows your mind. Jackson shook his head clear and yelled, Everyone below deck! No one stays alone! They rushed below. Boone slammed the hatch shut. The darkness outside was absolute now, and even the orb barely glowed. Otis pulled out a thick leather book and began drawing symbols in salt on the floor. These should dampen the echo. Keep your thoughts your own. They waited, huddled around a single lantern, while the ship drifted slowly over the trench. Suddenly, the hull groaned. The sound echoed not once, but twice. Then a second groan closer. Not the ship. Something else. Knock, knock. 2 taps on the side of the ship. Then a voice, low and rumbling, almost human. Let me aboard. Boone gripped his harpoon. Oh no, 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 no one's inviting you in, pal. Jackson grabbed a rope and climbed to the deck. The others followed. They stepped out into a thick black fog that had crept over the ship. The air was cold and wet. Something stood at the far end of the deck. A man, or the shape of one. Its face was hidden by a hood, its hands dripped with seawater, and its eyes glowed pale green. Ilara, daughter of Quinn, you left me. Ilara stepped back. That was my father's voice. It's not him, Jackson shouted. It's feeding on us. The shape turned towards Boone. The gold was never yours. Boone snarled and threw the harpoon. It struck the figure, but passed right through. The figure vanished into a splash of black mist. Instantly the fog lifted, the voices stopped, and the water calmed. The ship rocked gently again as if nothing had happened. Jackson wiped sweat from his brow. That's over. No, Otis said, staring at the map orb. It's just beginning. The golden lines now pointed towards a tiny speck,
far across the sea, marked in swirling symbols, a place simply called the Island of Bones. Jackson clenched his fists. Then we sail at dawn. He looked back once more at the deep black water. The voices were gone, but the feeling they left behind was not.
And beneath them, the trench still whispered, waiting. The hollow star sailed through a blood-orange sunrise, leaving the echo trenches behind. Though the fog had cleared, the weight of what each crew member heard still clung to their expressions. Boone barely cracked a joke all morning. Ilara moved with uncharacteristic silence. Even Otis stared longer than usual into the sea. Only Jackson Kane kept his focus sharp, one hand on the wheel, the other clutching his father's old compass, even though it hadn't pointed true in days. Ahead lay a strip of land, barely visible against the horizon, not on any official chart and only faintly sketched on the glowing orb's projected map. The Island of Bones. As they approached, the sea turned shallow, the water beneath shifting from blue to a dull gray. Pieces of broken ships jutted from the waves, splintered masts, shattered hulls, rusted anchors. Graveyard, Boone muttered. Hundreds of wrecks. Ilara adjusted the sails. More than that, look! The beach came into view, white and silent. Only it wasn't sand. It was bone. Skulls, ribs, spines, all bleached by sun and sea, tangled together like a blanket across the island's shore. Giant bones of sea beasts mixed with the remains of long-forgotten sailors. The ship groaned as it dropped anchor just outside the reef. "Who lands first?" Boone asked. Jackson stepped forward. "I do. Otis, Ilara, you're with me. Boone, stay here and guard the ship." Boone raised an eyebrow. "Why do I always get the fun jobs?" "Because you punch first and ask questions never," Jackson replied. "We need someone who'll keep this boat here when we get back." Boone smirked. "Fair." They rowed ashore in a small dinghy, stepping carefully onto the Island of Bones. Each footstep crunched unnervingly. The air was dry despite the ocean breeze. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of waves. Only silence. At the center of the island stood a stone pillar, rising from the ground like a crooked finger. Vines wrapped around its base and ancient runes etched its surface. Ilara examined the carvings. These are old sea markings. Not a warning, more like a test. "What kind of test?" Otis frowned. She pressed a finger to a groove in the stone. A trial of will. Suddenly, the ground rumbled. The pillar split open with a crack, revealing a spiral staircase that led beneath the surface. Jackson drew his revolver. Down we go. They descended slowly into the dark. The staircase led to a vast underground chamber lit by glowing moss. Walls of coral and bone stretched high above, forming an eerie cathedral beneath the island. And then they saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Motionless. Covered in seaweed and salt, hunched, eyes blank, limbs stiff like statues. They looked like the undead, but frozen. Their skin pale gray, lips cracked, limbs stiff like statues. "Are they?" Ilara whispered. Otis shook his head. Not dead. Not alive. Then one of the figures moved. A sudden twitch. Its eyes rolled up, its jaw cracked open, and it screamed. In an instant the others awoke. The chamber erupted in motion as the creatures, salt walkers, lurched forward. Once human sailors, cursed by the island to wander between life and death, driven by rage and despair. Jackson fired a warning shot that echoed through the stone walls. "Back," he shouted. "Form a line." Otis swung a torch, the flame holding several of the walkers at bay. Ilara threw a pouch of salt across the ground. Where it landed, the creatures recoiled, hissing. They fought their way toward the far end of the chamber, where another altar stood. This one carved with a strange glowing symbol, the shape of Luminafin. Ilara knelt beside it, shouting over the chaos. "This is it, the second sigil, the one that unlocks the path through the hollow shoals." Jackson covered her as Otis used the torch to burn a path through the advancing walkers. Ilara pressed her hand to the altar. The symbol flared. A low hum filled the chamber as the salt walkers suddenly froze, then crumbled to dust. Silence returned. They emerged from the staircase breathless, clothes torn, faces cut. Boone was waiting at the beach, harpoon ready. "Well?" Jackson tossed him the engraved stone Ilara retrieved from the altar. "We've not the next piece. It points to a passage beneath the hollow shoals. That's where Luminafin feeds." Boone looked around at the landscape of bones. "Remind me why we're not running back to dry land and pretending this never happened?" Jackson looked toward the horizon. "Because my father is still stone, and the witch who did it still breathes."
They returned to the hollow star and hoisted sail. Behind them, the island of bones faded into mist once more, disappearing as if it had never been there. But now, the glowing orb showed something new. A glowing red mark, a warning. Zaraquin Depths, home of the Deep Maw. "Looks like we don't get a break," Boone muttered. Jackson tightened his grip on the helm. "Then we don't stop." The hollow star sliced through restless waters, its sails pulled taut against rising winds. The magical orb pulsed steadily near the helm, casting golden light over the wooden deck. Ahead of the ship lay a jagged line on the map, the hollow shoals, a maze of shifting sandbars, whirlpools, and hidden trenches. But now a new danger awaited within it, something marked in red. Zaraquin Depths, home of the Deep Maw. Jackson Kane stood near the prow, hands gripping the railing, eyes narrowed against the spray of salt. Beside him, Ilara was scanning the sea with her spyglass. Boone cleaned his harpoon quietly, unusually serious, while Otis muttered old sailor prayers under his breath. "What do we know about the Deep Maw?" Jackson asked. Otis looked up. "It's a guardian. Some say it was made by the sea gods to guard what should never be found. Others say it is a sea god, forgotten and angry." "Has anyone ever seen it and lived?" Boone asked. "One man, Captain Targo. He came back blind, mute, and covered in scars. He never spoke again." Boone snorted. "So, technically, no." As they crossed into the hollow shoals, the sea changed. Waters turned murky green. Strange bubbles rose from below. Jagged rock spires jutted from the waves like fangs. The ship weaved through them carefully under Ilara's sharp navigation. Suddenly the orb pulsed red. Ilara gasped. "It's here! We've reached the Zaraquin Depths!" The sea beneath them turned black. A swirl of glowing kelp formed on the surface. Within it rose 3 towering pillars of coral, spaced evenly in a triangle. "That's no natural formation," Otis murmured. On each pillar, a symbol glowed, one shaped like a trident, one like a wave, and one like a spiral eye. A voice echoed through the air, not from a person, but from the water itself. 3 must step forward. Only those deemed worthy by the sea may pass into her deepest heart." Jackson stepped forward. "We accept the trial." Boone grumbled. "Of course we do." The ship anchored just inside the coral triangle. As instructed by the glowing symbols, Jackson, Ilara, and Boone each climbed one of the pillars, helped by climbing ropes and sheer stubbornness.
At the top of Jackson's pillar stood a carved bowl filled with seawater. Above it, a stone hand held a three-pronged trident glowing faintly. Beside it, words were etched in ancient script. "Speak your truth, or be drowned in silence." Jackson stared into the water, his reflection wavering. And then it spoke. "Why do you seek the pearl?" He hesitated. "To save my father." "Is that all?" Jackson clenched his jaw. "And because I couldn't save my mother, I won't fail again." The trident glowed brighter. "Truth accepted." The hand released the trident. It fell into Jackson's arms, warm and heavy. On Boone's pillar, he faced a different trial. A stone platform shifted, revealing a coiled serpent of coral. It struck out, fast. Boone dodged and caught it by the throat. As it hissed, a voice echoed. "Do you fight because you are strong, or because you are afraid?" He snarled, muscles shaking. "I fight because I protect the people who can't fight for themselves." The serpent froze. "Courage accepted." It turned to mist. Ilara's pillar tested her with light and illusion. She saw her parents calling to her from the edge of the sea. Her mother reached out. "Come home," she said. "Leave the ocean. It doesn't love you." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, but she turned her back. Knowledge accepted. The three returned to the ship, each holding a glowing shard, pieces of a greater trident. When combined, the shards fused into a full weapon, humming with deep ocean magic. The sea parted ahead. A wide glowing trench opened between the coral, revealing a narrow path that descended into the ocean's heart. Otis bowed his head. "We passed. The sea will let us through." "But what about the deep maw?" Boone asked.
"Still waiting," Jackson replied. "But now we hold the key to face it." Ilara placed the trident near the orb. The magical map shimmered again, this time showing Luminofin's lair glowing deep beneath the seafloor. They had passed the test, but now they had to survive the final descent, and whatever watched from the dark below. The hollow star drifted slowly into the glowing path revealed by the fused trident. The sea around them shimmered with eerie light, blues, greens, and purples swirling together like an underwater aurora. The waves were calm now, as though the ocean itself waited for what was to come. Ilara stood at the helm, her hands tight on the wheel. "According to the orb," she said, "Luminofin's lair lies beyond the coral cavern. That's our last passage before the final descent." Jackson Kane stared ahead, the glowing trench visible beneath the hull like a gateway into another world. "Then we stay alert. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that beauty doesn't mean safety." Otis nodded. "The coral cavern is older than the sea charts. Some say it was carved by the Luminofin itself as it swam through the seabed in ancient times. It's a sacred place, part maze, part grave." Boone frowned. "Sounds cozy." As the ship glided deeper, the seafloor rose up, narrowing into a vibrant valley of coral towers. The colors were breathtaking, pinks like burning sunsets, blues as deep as the night sky, and greens that glowed like starlight. Fishes with translucent fins darted through the coral, leaving trails of sparkling bubbles. Then the orb pulsed. The projected map shifted again, showing the coral cavern's twisting passageways and a glowing symbol at its center, the mark of Luminofin. "This is it," Ilara said. "We'll need to dive. The entrance is below that ridge." They prepared quickly, each wearing enchanted air wraps from Ilara's stash, thin, skin-tight fabrics woven with kelp magic that allowed them to breathe for hours underwater. Jackson looked to Boone, Ilara, and Otis. "We go in together. Stay close. If we find the Luminofin, we don't hesitate." Boone flexed his hands. "Let's find that shiny fish." The coral cavern entrance yawned before them like the mouth of a sleeping giant. As they swam inside, coral walls rose on either side, forming arched tunnels filled with flickering light. Glowing algae lit the way, but strange shadows danced just out of sight. They moved carefully, spears and blades ready. In one chamber, they passed massive statues carved from coral, shapes of ancient sea creatures, gods, or perhaps guardians. In another, glowing crystals hummed with energy, as if whispering a language too old to understand. Then, the walls narrowed, forcing them into a tight passage. The water here felt colder, darker. And then, they saw it. A wide, open chamber of such beauty and vastness it left them breathless. At its center floated a great, glowing fish, Luminafin. Its scales shimmered like polished pearl, and light radiated from its body in soft pulses. Its eyes were intelligent, ancient, and serene. Its fins waved slowly, elegant as silk in the current. Beneath its belly, embedded in its chest, glowed a single large pearl, pure white, with threads of gold swirling inside. "The Pearl of Talmarin," Alara whispered. They approached slowly, but then a tremor shook the cavern. The walls quaked, and from the far side of the chamber, a dark shape unfurled. It was not a fish. It was not a shark. It was a guardian beast, built of coral and bone and rage, twice the size of Luminafin. Its body coiled like a serpent, and its head bore a crown of broken tridents, each one from past challengers. Its eyes opened, red as burning coals. "The deep maw," Oda said. It surged forward with terrifying speed. Jackson shoved Alara aside just as the creature struck, its jaws snapping through a pillar of coral. Boone swung a blade at its side, but it bounced harmlessly off the armored hide. "We can't kill it," Alara shouted. "We have to distract it, buy time for Luminafin." Jackson turned to the glowing fish. "Can you hear me? Please, we came to save my father. We mean no harm." The Luminafin floated silently, but its glow began to intensify. The pearl in its chest pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, without warning, it darted toward the deep maw. Its body spun in elegant spirals, weaving between the creature's strikes. The beast roared, chasing the fish deeper into the cavern. "This is our chance," Alara yelled. "It's giving us an opening." They swam toward a coral platform, now glowing with runes, the Luminafin's resting place. The pearl, shaken loose during the chase, floated downward. Jackson reached out and caught it. As his fingers closed around the pearl, a burst of warmth spread through his body, like sunlight, like hope. Then the cavern shook violently. The deep maw, enraged, was returning. Jackson looked at his crew. "We have the pearl. Time to leave." They surged upward through the narrow tunnels as coral shattered behind them. The beast's roar echoed through the cavern, but the walls collapsed between them, trapping it within. They emerged from the coral cavern, gasping at the surface. The hollow star waited, sails ready.
They climbed aboard, and Jackson held up the pearl, its glow shining in every direction. "We've got it," he said. "Now let's get home." But even as they set sail, deep beneath them, something stirred again. The sea never forgets. The hollow star sailed through calm waters under a starless sky. The glowing pearl sat in a velvet pouch secured by Alara and wrapped in layers of linen soaked in brine, as instructed by Otis. It pulsed gently, casting soft light over the deck like a lantern cradling the soul of the sea. Jackson stood at the bow, silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every breath he took felt heavier with responsibility. The journey was almost complete, but the closer they got to home, the deeper a sense of dread crept into his gut. "Alara," he said as she approached, "how long until we reach Black Rock Port?"
2 days, if the wind holds steady, she replied, watching the pearl flicker with a curious expression. The magic is stable. It's calling to something, or someone. Jackson nodded. Then the witch knows we're coming. Boone leaned over the railing, chewing the end of a dried rope for lack of anything better. Let her know. We fought monsters, ghosts, and sea gods. Let's see if she can do worse. She can, Otis muttered. That night, the wind died. The ship slowed to a crawl, sails limp in the humid air. The sky turned strange, a marbled mix of purple and gray with flashes of green lightning that made the clouds glow from within. Then came the fog. It rolled across the sea like a living tide, thick and fast, cutting off sight in every direction. Storm? Boone asked. No, Ilara whispered. This is her. Suddenly, the water around the ship rippled, not from wind, but from something moving underneath. Jackson drew his revolver. Positions, eyes sharp. From the mist, shapes emerged. Not sea creatures, not undead, but people. Pale and thin, with long dark hair and eyes that glowed white. They walked on the surface of the water like it was stone, surrounding the hollow star with slow, coordinated steps. Otis gasped. Sea-bound thralls, servants of the witch. One of them raised a hand. A glowing sigil formed in the air, twisting, spinning, cracking with energy. "Get down!" Ilara yelled. A bolt of sea light exploded against the mast, shattering wood and setting the sail ablaze. Boone was the first to charge. With a roar, he grabbed the harpoon launcher, swung it toward the nearest thrall, and fired. The harpoon struck the water walker through the chest, flinging it backward into the sea. "Boone, fall back!" Jackson shouted. But Boone didn't stop. He leapt onto the edge of the ship and jumped straight into the water, landing among the thralls like a hammer of fury. He fought like a wild storm, punching, slashing, drowning them in their own magic. "Cover him!" Jackson shouted. Ilara launched firebolts from her palm, igniting 2 more attackers. Otis chanted a binding spell that froze several in place, but they kept coming, endless. Jackson saw it happen in slow motion. Boone, surrounded. A spear of water shot up from beneath him. He turned too late. It pierced his side. Jackson screamed, "Boone!" But Boone didn't fall. He grinned, then grabbed 2 thralls by the heads and slammed them together before roaring into the sky, his body glowing faintly from a spell he had taken earlier, an old sailor's charm meant to delay death for a few moments. "Jax," Boone called. He looked up at his friend with eyes full of pain and peace. "Finish the journey." And with that, Boone Rider plunged himself and the remaining thralls beneath the sea. Silence returned. The fog broke apart like torn fabric. The water stilled. Only the pearl glowed brighter. Morning. They buried Boone at sea that night, wrapped in sailcloth, lowered with care. Ilara spoke first. He laughed in the face of monsters. He cracked jokes at death. He deserved a better end, but I think he'd say this one was just fine. Otis added a single coin from his own pouch. "For passage, wherever he's going." Jackson stood over the railing, gripping the soaked cloth of Boone's empty coat. "I'll finish it," he whispered. "I swear it." Then he dropped the coat into the sea and looked at the pearl. It pulsed once.
Twice, then dimmed. It was waiting. So was the witch.
The wind returned with fury. As the hollow star neared the shores of Black Rock Port, waves churned beneath her hull and thunder cracked across the sky. But this storm was not natural. It was conjured. It was waiting for them. Jackson Kane stood at the bow, his long coat flapping wildly. The pearl, now glowing like the heart of a star, rested in a chest wrapped in seaweed runes and bound by Otis's salt-forged chain. It hummed with pressure, like it knew the moment had come. "Black Rock ahead!" Alara shouted from the mast. The cliffs loomed in the distance, jagged and steep, with the old ruins of Gravemoor Keep barely visible beyond the mist. That was where the witch had cast her curse. That was where Jackson's father turned to stone, and where he would be freed, or forever lost. Otis emerged from below deck, his hands glowing faintly. "The pearl's ready, but we'll need to activate it with the same magic that caused the curse, or it won't bond." "So we face her," Jackson said. "She won't make it easy," Alara added, "but she'll want to see you. She's waited years for this." Jackson nodded. "Then let's give her what she wants." The hollow star dropped anchor in a small cove beneath the cliffs. Jackson, Alara, and Otis disembarked and began the long climb up the stone path, the storm following behind them like a stalking predator. Every step stirred memories. The night he watched the witch rise from the sea, eyes glowing, whispering her cruel promise. His father, Silas Kane, standing between her and the town, refusing to give up the map to Lumina Finn. And then in a flash of green flame, stone. When they reached the top of the cliff, the witch was waiting. Morvana. She stood before the ruined archway of Gravemoor Keep, her dress swirling like oil in water, her hair made of writhing seaweed and shadows. Her eyes were cold, cruel, and glittered like emeralds soaked in poison. "Jackson Kane," she purred, "the boy who escaped my curse, and now returns with the pearl." "I came to break it," he growled. "Oh, you brought it. You even bled for it. But you still don't understand. It was never about your father." Jackson's fists clenched. "What?" Morvana circled him slowly. "Your father was only the key. I needed someone to find Lumina Finn's pearl, someone bold and foolish. The stone curse was a leash, a promise, Kane, and now you've fulfilled it for me." Lightning struck the ruins as she raised her hands. The earth cracked, the stones split, and there, rising from the broken earth, was Silas Kane, still frozen in stone, his face locked in grim defiance. "Give me the pearl," she hissed, "or I shatter his body into dust." Jackson stepped forward and smiled. "You've already lost." He held up the glowing pearl. Morvana screamed as Otis raised his staff and slammed it into the ground, activating the ritual. Runes lit the path around them, pulsing with light. Alara threw a vial of glowing sea salt into the air, and the wind howled backward, scattering Morvana's power. "No!" she shrieked. "You can't!" Jackson stepped into the circle, holding the pearl over his father's stone heart. "Silas Kane," he whispered, "you stood for honor, for hope. Come back to us." He placed the pearl against the stone. The moment it touched, the light exploded outward. A pulse of warmth tore through the cliff. The stone cracked, fell away. Silas Kane gasped and opened his eyes. The magic shattered Morvana's veil. Her body twisted, shrinking as her power drained away. Otis raised his staff again, binding her in glowing chains of salt and kelp. "No more," he said.
She screamed as the chains wrapped around her form, pulling her down into the sea, into the dark where forgotten things sleep. And then silence. Only the wind, soft now. The sky opened. Stars shone again. Father and son embraced. Silas's voice was hoarse. "You came back? I never stopped trying. You brought the pearl?" "I brought more than that," Jackson said, turning to Alara and Otis. "I brought family." They returned to the hollow star together, one man short, but with a bond stronger than any spell. Epilogue. Boone's name was carved in the helm of the hollow star in silver. Silas returned to the village, older and slower, but full of stories and gratitude. Alara took the pearl to the coral library to be studied and protected. Otis returned to the sea temples, where he was hailed as a sage of legends. And Jackson? He sailed again. Because somewhere, out there, other curses waited, and the sea was wide. The sea was calm, almost too calm. 3 weeks had passed since Jackson Kane returned from the adventure that saved his father and sealed the witch Morvana beneath the tides. The village of Black Rock Port had begun to rebuild, fishermen returned to sea, and the people whispered Jackson's name like a legend. But Jackson couldn't sleep. He often stood at the edge of the docks in the middle of the night, staring at the water, listening, waiting. The ocean was no longer just a body of water to him, it was a voice. And tonight, it was whispering again. From the shadows behind him, Silas Kane stepped forward, leaning heavily on a cane. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jackson didn't turn. "Something's wrong out there." Silas nodded. "The sea's restless. Old sailors talk about whirlpools forming where no currents exist, coral islands vanishing overnight, birds flying inland for no reason. And then there's this." He handed Jackson a shell, large, twisted, covered in faint glowing runes. Jackson took it, held it to his ear, and froze. Through the shell came a voice, warped by water and magic. "Jax, help me. Storm, not dead. Trapped. She's not alone." Jackson's hand trembled.
Boone. It was his voice. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Silas looked grim. A sailor washed up near Deep Wake Reef, ship torn in half, no crew left, just the shell clutched in his hand. Jackson clenched his jaw. "Boone died a hero. I saw him fall." "Maybe," Silas said, "but maybe he didn't stay fallen." By morning, Jackson stood on the docks beside Alara and Otis. The hollow star, newly repaired, waited at anchor. Supplies were loaded, sails rolled tight, the deck cleaned and polished. A new name had been carved beside Boone's silver plaque. "For the lost who still call." "You sure about this?" Alara asked, crossing her arms. Jackson nodded. "I heard him. Boone's alive. Somewhere." Otis adjusted the strap on his satchel of scrolls. If he's caught between dimensions, that means one thing. Someone is using soul magic, and that was Morvana's specialty. Alara frowned. "But she's gone." "No," Jackson said quietly. "She was sealed, not destroyed." Otis added, "And if she's not alone, we're dealing with something worse." Alara shook her head. "Then let's find him and end this." As the hollow star sailed out to sea once more, Jackson watched the horizon, clutching the shell. It no longer whispered, but he knew the message had been real. That night,
As the moon rose, the stars above the ship began to blink, one by one, as if swallowed by something unseen. And then the wind changed. Otis, standing near the orb at the helm, looked up sharply. "It's starting." "What is?" Jackson asked. Otis pointed to the sea. A whirlpool had begun to form, slowly, quietly, miles wide, as if the ocean itself had opened a mouth. From its center, light flickered, and out of the deep, a black shard of stone rose, floating above the water, glowing faintly. Etched on its face were 4 marks. One was the symbol of Morvana. 3 others remained dark. Jackson's blood ran cold. She wasn't the only one. Alara's eyes widened. "There are more." "A coven," Otis whispered. "The Abyssal Sisters, banished long ago. Morvana's fall must have awakened them." Jackson turned to his crew. "This isn't just about Boone anymore. We're sailing into war." The hollow star approached the black shard, rising from the ocean, silent, ominous, and ancient. The water around it churned, as if disturbed by something not yet seen. The runes carved into the floating stone pulsed faintly. One symbol lit with green fire, the mark of Morvana. The remaining 3 remained dark, but stirred with faint whispers that none of the crew could understand. Otis leaned over the orb as it projected new outlines. A cursed map expanding on its own. A jagged landmass appeared, blinking red. Sangira, the island that bleeds. "That's not on any map," Alara said, her voice low. "It wouldn't be," Otis replied. Sangira was sealed centuries ago, said to be an island cursed by the second sea witch, Nalith, the blood weaver. It bleeds from its own ground. Every traveler who landed there vanished. Jackson stood firm, staring at the red dot. If that shard rose because Morvana was defeated and another witch is awakening, then this island is our next stop. Otis warned, "Nalith doesn't use illusions like Morvana. She works with life and blood. Her magic seeps into the roots of land and sea. Even the air on that island may betray us." Alara strapped her daggers tighter. "Then we cut the air if we have to." As they neared Sangira, the skies darkened again, not from storm clouds, but from a thick red mist that hovered low over the water, like a wound in the sky. The island itself rose like a jagged tooth, covered in black vines with thorns that oozed a thick crimson sap. Strange trees lined the shore, each shaped like twisted hands reaching for help. The air smelled of salt and iron. The moment the ship touched the shoreline, the sea pulled back as though afraid. Jackson, Alara, and Otis stepped ashore with caution. Every step on the soft red earth left a footprint that filled slowly with crimson liquid. Not blood, but something close. "That's not normal," Alara muttered. "No," Otis said. "It's the island's defense. It remembers pain. It bleeds when strangers arrive." Then they heard it. A heartbeat. Not theirs. The ground was pulsing. Boom, boom, boom. It came from beneath them. Jackson raised his weapon. "Let's find the source and get out fast." They pushed deeper into the island, following a path of glowing fungus that pulsed like veins. Strange flowers watched them with eyes instead of petals. Trees whispered in a forgotten tongue.
Then they saw it, a structure, ancient, overgrown, made of dark coral and bone. A temple. At its entrance, a fountain gushed red water into a stone basin shaped like a heart. Otis approached it and gasped, "This is it! Nyolith's altar!" Alara examined the basin. "It's glowing! Something's inside!" She reached in carefully and pulled out a small carved object, half sunken into the liquid. It was a compass,
but instead of a needle, it held a droplet of red light suspended in the center. Otis gasped. A blood-bound compass. It points to the nearest living soul trapped by a witch's spell. Jackson's eyes widened. Boone! He grabbed the compass, and instantly the red droplet spun and pointed north, toward the mountain in the center of the island. The closer they got to the mountain, the stranger the world became. The sky flickered between night and day. The trees whispered secrets only they knew. And the heartbeat beneath the ground grew louder. Boom, boom, boom. They reached the base of the mountain as night fell again. Carved into its face were stairs made of bone and red coral, leading up to a platform that glowed like fire. Nihilith stood there, cloaked in seaweed and shadow, her skin etched with red glowing runes. Her face was covered by a mask of bone shaped like a crying woman. She didn't speak. She only turned toward them and lifted her hand. Dozens of red wines shot from the ground, wrapping around Jackson and Alara's feet. Otis raised a shield spell, but it cracked instantly. Nihilith moved her fingers again, and the wines lifted Boone from the mountain's peak. His body hovered in the air, limp, ghostly pale, his spirit flickering in and out of the air like a dying flame. "Boone!" Jackson screamed. Nihilith's voice entered their minds, not spoken, but felt. "The soul you seek is the key to the door you closed." Morvana fell, so now her sisters rise. One soul to awaken one witch. Two more remain. The mountain shook. The wines released Boone, dropping him into the mist below. "No!" Jackson broke free, diving after him. He caught Boone mid-fall. Boone's eyes flickered open. "You came!" "I never left," Jackson said. Then the mist swallowed them both. Back on the ship, Alara and Otis pulled Jackson and Boone aboard, coughing, soaked in red fog and seawater. Boone groaned weakly. "She's coming! All of them! And one of them isn't really a witch!" Jackson looked at the compass. 2 new droplets had appeared, glowing faintly. 2 more witches. 2 more trials. Boone lay on the Hollerstar's lower deck, wrapped in sea-soaked blankets, his skin pale as moonlight. Alara sat beside him, cleaning wounds that bled no blood. Otis stood over him, his fingers tracing air runes above Boone's chest to stabilize the fading energy that pulsed from his spirit. Jackson leaned against the doorway, arms folded, eyes stormy with thought. Boone's voice was faint but steady now. "Nihilith didn't kill me. She split me. My body fell with the thralls. My soul, she took that and locked it away in her vines. I could see you, Jax. I watched everything. You stayed alive long enough to call for help. That saved you. That brought us here," Jackson said, sitting beside him. "Yeah, well, I figured if I was going to hurt you, might as well be loud." Otis interrupted gently. "What you said, right before we left the island. You said one of the witches isn't really a witch. What did you mean?" Boone's eyes darkened. "She's something worse, older than the sea. Even the other witches fear her. They call her Sulcorin, the current that whispers. She doesn't wear a face. She doesn't cast spells. She changes things." Jackson frowned. "Changes? People, lands, time. She twists them. You sail into her waters and come out years later, or not at all. I heard her whispering while I was trapped, and she's waking up." The blood compass pulsed on the table beside them. 3 droplets now. The third was flickering, unsteady, like lightning in a jar. Alara studied the map. The next point lies northeast, open water, near the edge of the known sea. That's where the maps end. Otis whispered, "The whispering current." By morning,
The hollow star was pushing toward the edge of the world. The sea grew quieter with every mile, too quiet. Not a gull in the sky, not a wave against the hull. The wind blew cold, though the sun burned high above. The crew moved in whispers without realizing it, as if something heard them every time they spoke out loud. Jackson stood at the bow with the blood compass in hand. Its light pointed toward a jagged curl of ocean that rose like a spiral staircase. A whirlpool in reverse. "Is that water rising?" Boone asked, standing beside him again, steadier now. Ilara confirmed with a nod. "That's not natural," Otis murmured. "That's her domain." They approached carefully. The ocean beneath the ship started whispering. Not words, memories. Boone heard his mother's laugh, the last time he saw her. Ilara heard the sound of crashing glass from a home she once fled. And Jackson heard his mother's lullaby, long forgotten. And Otis heard nothing, because he was no longer on the ship. "Ilara!" Jackson shouted. "Otis is gone!" She spun. He had been there seconds ago. Then the air shimmered near the helm, and Otis reappeared, stumbling, gasping for air. "I was in my childhood home," he said, dazed. "I walked through the door, and my father was alive, but it wasn't real. She's pulling us into our pasts, or twisting what we miss most."
Boone's voice was grave. "It's how she traps you. You go chasing a memory and forget the mission. You forget yourself." Jackson tightened his grip on the wheel. "We go in with rope lines tied around our waists. No one walks alone." They entered the whirlpool in reverse. Inside, it was like drifting through a tunnel of glass. The sky bent. The sea above them twisted. Stars flickered where sunlight should be. Time unraveled. Suddenly, the ship hit something. Not rock, but air made solid. A voice echoed, calm and endless. "You seek to unmake the deep. You bear light where only shadows should swim. You walk memory's edge with blades drawn. Turn back, or forget all you are." Ilara grabbed Jackson's arm. "Look!" A figure floated in the air above the ship. It was made of water and wind, with no eyes and no mouth, but it watched them. The blood compass in Jackson's hand began to spin wildly, and the third droplet finally stopped, pointing toward the being. Otis's eyes widened. "Selkorin isn't a witch. She's the current itself." And then she spoke, not in sound, but into their minds. "One among you belongs to me." Jackson raised his blade. "You'll take none." But the current surged forward, and with it a wall of twisted air smashed into the ship. Everyone was thrown to the deck. Boone, still weak, slid toward the edge. Jackson dove, grabbing his arm. "Not again," he shouted. Ilara raised her daggers, carving a symbol into the mast, one that burned with a fire from the coral cavern. The water hissed and recoiled. The vision shattered, and Selkorin was gone. The ship drifted again, silent. The compass now pointed to the sky. The crew looked at one another, shaken. Boone broke the silence. "We faced her and lived," Otis added, "but she didn't try to kill us." "She's waiting," Jackson said, "for us to gather all 3 keys." He opened his hand. There, glowing from the compass, were now 3 symbols, each glowing, each unlocked. One remained. A final mark on the map, flickering, distant, and shaped like a crown. The hollow star floated at the edge of silence. Behind them, the whispering current had vanished like a dream fading with the dawn. Before them stretched the stillest sea they had ever seen, flat as glass, silver under a sun that refused to rise or set. time had paused. The orb at the helm pulsed faintly, and the blood compass glowed white-hot. All 3 droplets were now steady and bright. But a 4th mark had begun to form on its surface. A crown, not made of gold, but of bone and coral, woven like a reef carved by kings. Otis leaned over the orb, eyes wide. That symbol, it's not of the witches. It's older. Ilara frowned. Older than the sea witches? Boone's voice was low. The throne beneath the sea. It was never empty. Jackson studied the map. The crown symbol shimmered atop a place none of them recognized, far beyond any sailor's tale. Only a single word glowed on the sea chart. Talmiris. Otis whispered. That's the ancient capital of the Drowned Kingdoms, a city that sunk in the first war between surface and sea. It was ruled by the Abyssal King, a being of great power who was betrayed by the witches when they wanted the pearl for themselves. Ilara tightened her grip on her belt. So, the final key is not a witch? Boone nodded. It's a king. Jackson turned toward the helm. Then we sail for Thalmiris. The sea shifted as they moved forward. The water darkened. The stars above changed, rearranging into constellations none of them recognized. It felt like stepping into another realm. Suddenly, the water split. Not cracked, not parted, but gently folded away like silk drawn back from a hidden door. A deep trench opened beneath them, glowing faintly with green and gold light. Ilara peered over the edge. That's no natural canyon. It's a throne chamber, Otis murmured, buried in the bones of the earth. Jackson adjusted the sails. Prepare to descend. Using enchanted chains and air-wap suits, the crew descended into the deep. The hollow stars stayed anchored above while they dropped into Talmiris, their lights dancing against massive arches, toppled towers, and statues buried in coral. Everything was silent, dead, except for the throne. At the far end of a massive plaza carved into the seabed, a structure loomed, taller than any building they'd seen underwater. At its heart sat a coral throne, twisted and cracked, surrounded by the remains of shattered spears, old armor, and long-rotted banners. On the throne sat a figure, still, silent, cloaked in seaweed and chains of barnacle-covered gold. Jackson whispered through the water, "The Abyssal King." Then the throne's eyes opened, not glowing, just awake, ancient, knowing. A voice boomed through the water, not as magic, but as authority. 3 witches fell. 1 king remains. You sail with my enemy's blood on your hands. Tell me why I should not end you where you float. Jackson stepped forward. Because we don't serve the witches. We fought them. We've bled to stop them. And what do you seek in return? The king asked. Jackson held up the pearl. Peace. The king rose from the throne slowly, his body cracking with age, coral falling from his limbs. Otis swam beside Jackson. We know what it can do. That's why it must be sealed, forever. The king studied them. Then you must face the throne's trial. If you fail, you join my court of bones. If you succeed, the sea will obey you. Jackson nodded. We accept. Suddenly, the ruins shifted. Statues came to life.
Ghostly warriors formed from broken shells and water, each one bearing ancient weapons. They surrounded the crew in a wide ring. In the center of the ring, the water shimmered and formed a glowing sigil. 3 symbols: truth, loyalty, and sacrifice. The king's voice echoed again. Choose one, speak it aloud. It shall decide the trial. Jackson looked to Alara, Boone, and Otis. Boone whispered, We've given everything. What we haven't given yet is more. Jackson stepped forward. Sacrifice. The ring shifted. And then the voice said, Then one of you must give up what cannot be returned. Jackson froze. What does that mean? Boone sighed and stepped forward. My soul. I was already halfway gone. Take me again. Let the others finish this. No, Jackson growled, not again. But Otis's eyes suddenly lit with realization. He stepped forward and spoke loudly. I give up my magic. All of it. The world paused. The water fell silent. Then the throne pulsed. Accepted. Otis collapsed to his knees as the glow left his body like mist rising from morning grass. His fingers stopped sparking. His staff shattered. But he was alive. The ghostly warriors vanished. The throne began to rise, breaking free from the seabed, lifting toward the hollow star above, and in its place, a final object emerged from the sand. A small, ancient crown of coral and pearl, humming with pure magic. Jackson took it in his hands, the fourth key, the final piece. Above them, the sea rumbled, the blood compass pulsed red, and all four droplets glowed as one. The abyss had awakened, and the final battle was near. The hollow star cut through the darkening waves with a quiet urgency. Above, the sky roared with clouds that swirled in unnatural spirals, bruised with violet and green lightning. Below, the sea churned from unseen currents that pulled and twisted against the ship's hull. On deck, Jackson Kane stood with the coral crown in hand, its power thrumming like a second heartbeat. With all four relics now secured, the pearl, the blood compass, the whisper shell, and the crown, an ancient tide had been stirred. The ocean remembered, and so did its oldest enemies. Behind him, Boone gripped the railing, his eyes scanning the horizon. He asked, You feel that? The air smells like metal. Laura nodded. That's not weather, that's magic. Old magic. Below deck, Otis sat in silence, wrapped in thick blankets. The once powerful sea sage now looked smaller, dimmer. The sacrifice of his magic left his eyes tired, but not broken. He said barely above a whisper, I can still hear the sea, but I can't speak to it anymore. Jackson joined him. You gave up everything. Otis smiled faintly. It was never mine to keep, but the sea will need new guardians now. Ones like you. Jackson clenched the crown. Then we'd better finish what we started. At sunset, the ocean turned black. Not from the absence of light, but from the presence of something else. The water stopped reflecting the sky. Instead, it began to swirl inward toward a massive point on the horizon, a glowing vortex. And rising from its center, a tower. No, not a tower. A spire of bone and shipwreck, hundreds of feet high, fused together by coral and chains. It screamed with the voices of sunken sailors and forgotten queens. Otis staggered to the top deck. That's it, the final citadel. Boone stepped forward, where the coven gathers. Alara adjusted her gear. Then that's where we end this. The tower loomed taller as they approached. Thunder cracked above it. Giant barnacle-covered bells swung in the wind, tolling soundlessly through the mist. The hollow star dropped anchor at its base. Steps carved from shattered hulls spiraled around the spire like a giant serpent. Jackson turned to his crew. Ready? Boone gave a thumbs up, his hand trembling slightly. Let's punch fate in the teeth. Otis nodded solemnly. If I fall, don't mourn me. Just keep going. Alara smiled faintly. We've faced worse, like that eel that tried to marry Boone. That was one time, Boone grumbled. They began the climb.
Each step higher brought whispers, echoes of their fears and failures. Illusions tried to trick them. Boone saw his mother drowning again. Alara relived the moment she fled her homeland. Otis saw his library burning. Jackson saw himself failing. over and over again. But they pushed through. At the summit, they reached a massive platform of black stone, cracked and glowing at the edges, and standing in a half circle, the Coven of the Abyss. 3 witches, Morvana, reborn and cloaked in tide mist, Nalith, now veiled in layers of crimson roots, and behind them, Selkeren, the whispering current, formless but present, her shape shifting like a wave frozen mid-collapse. But between them all stood a 4th figure, the Abyssal King, alive, crowned once more. He turned, and his voice boomed. "The sea called you Jackson Kane, but you bring fire into its heart. Why?" Jackson held out the coral crown and the pearl. "To stop this war before it swallows both land and sea." Morvana laughed, her voice like breaking shells. "You cannot stop what was never meant to be stopped. The sea must rise again. The world above must fall." Boone shouted back, "You already lost once. You don't scare us." Nalith hissed, "But you should be afraid, because this time we won't be cast into the deep. We will rise." Suddenly, the platform cracked, and the sea below roared up like a giant mouth. The witches began to chant. The pearl pulsed dangerously in Jackson's hand. Otis raised his arm. The elements, they're combining their power. They're using the relic's energy to awaken something. Elara narrowed her eyes. No, someone. In the center of the spire, the stone floor split open. A massive eye blinked beneath them. A creature, buried for centuries, began to awaken. Not a witch, not a king, but something primordial. Otis gasped. "They're trying to awaken the tide-born god, the first creation of the sea." Jackson turned to Boone. "You still got that dynamite from Deepwake?" Boone grinned. "Thought you'd never ask." As the witches' magic swirled around them and the world began to shake, Jackson shouted, "This ends now!" He stepped forward, the pearl glowing like a star, the coral crown on his head. The sea boiled beneath them. Morvana lunged forward. Nalith howled. Selkeren pulsed outward in waves. And then Jackson plunged the pearl into the stone beneath their feet. Boom! A shockwave erupted. The spire cracked. Light burst from the wound in the sea. The witches screamed. The king roared. The sea exploded. And everything went white. White. It was all Jackson could see. No sea, no sky, no ship, but endless blinding light that stretched in all directions. He floated, weightless, breathless, as if time itself had paused to ask a question. Then, slowly, the light dimmed. Shapes began to return. He was underwater, but it wasn't the ocean. He floated inside a space that looked like the sea, but moved like memory. Above him was the shattered spire of the witches, frozen mid-collapse. Below him, the eye of the tide-born god, still half-closed, pulsed faintly beneath layers of stone and coral. And around him, silence. No waves, no bubbles, no heartbeats. Jackson kicked upward, swimming toward the surface, lungs burning, but the surface never came. Instead, he found himself on his feet. The water vanished. He now stood in a vast, endless desert of white coral. The sky above shimmered like glass. The only sound, his own breath. Then a voice echoed behind him. "You shouldn't be here." He spun. A girl stood in the coral, young, no older than 13. Her eyes were deep and ancient. Her hair was the color of sea foam. She wore a robe made of flowing kelp and sand. "Who are you?"
Jackson asked. I'm the sea's memory. When too much power is used in the wrong way, I wake. Jackson looked around. Where is everyone? She pointed at the horizon, suspended, between breaths, between death and rebirth. You, Jackson Kane, pierced the ocean's veil. You brought the pearl to its origin. That act broke the balance. Jackson stepped forward. I did what I had to. The witches were awakening the tide-born god. I had no choice. The girl nodded slowly. True, but now you must choose again. With a wave of her hand, the coral desert shifted. Now they stood above the ocean. The hollow star floated beneath them, trapped in a time bubble. Boone was frozen mid-fall. Elara's blade hovered mid-air. Otis sat with his head bowed, motionless. You can return, the girl said, and finish the battle. But you'll need the sea's final blessing. And the cost? She turned to face him. You'll never be the same. Suddenly, the sea rushed back in. Jackson fell through it, crashing into reality back on the top of the spire. Everything had changed. The sky was still split from the explosion. The Tideborn's god's eye had closed again. The witches were gone, scattered or silent. The coral throne floated in pieces.
Jackson gasped for air. He wasn't alone. Boone grabbed him by the arm, pulling him up. Jax, you're alive! I think so, Jackson coughed. Elara and Otis came into view, bruised, bloodied, but standing. The hollow star, though battered, floated nearby. But the sea was still, dead still. No waves, no wind, no current. Boone looked around nervously. It's too quiet. Otis spoke softly. The sea is waiting. It doesn't know who it belongs to now. Jackson reached into his satchel and pulled out the crown and the pearl, both dim, both heavy. Then the spire beneath their feet began to shift. A glow emerged from the water. Not the witches, not the god, but something new. A figure, tall and cloaked in robes of shimmering sea thread, rose above the waves. His face was unseen, his presence enormous but calm. Otis gasped, "The Tidewalker!" Elara's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Boone answered, stunned. "The one who walks between the sea and sky, a myth." The Tidewalker spoke in a voice like surf across stone. "The balance is shattered. The thrones are empty. Witches cast into silence. Gods remain dreaming. Who among you shall carry the current now?" The group stood in stunned silence. Then Jackson stepped forward. "I don't want to rule, but I'll protect both sea and sky if that's what's needed." The Tidewalker raised one hand. "Then the sea shall mark you, not as king, not as weapon, but as bridge." Light poured over Jackson, engulfing him in strands of silver foam and blue flame. When it faded, he stood taller, eyes glowing faintly, the sea swirling behind him. The pearl rose into the air, split in half, and then sealed itself into his palms, burned into him like tattoos. Otis whispered, "You're no longer just a cowboy, Jax. You're legend now." Later, back aboard the hollow star, the sea finally stirred. A breeze returned. The sun broke through. Jackson stood at the helm, watching the horizon. Boone stood beside him, arms crossed. "What now?" Boone asked. Jackson smiled. "We sail, we protect, and we wait." "For what?" Elara asked, stepping up with her usual confidence. Jackson turned.
for the next storm, because there's always another one. The hollow star cut through calmer waters now, its patch sails fluttering in the forgiving wind. The sky above had softened from bruised violet to clear cobalt blue, and the sun cast golden paths across the surface. For the first time in weeks, the ocean breathed in rhythm again. Alive, no longer trembling. Jackson stood at the helm, his hands glowing faintly where the pearl sigils were branded. He felt everything, the pull of the tides, the mood of the waves, the way the sea whispered in thought rather than sound. He was the bridge now. Not a king, not a warrior, but something the ocean had never seen. A guardian between worlds. Ilara leaned on the rail beside him, gazing toward the misty line on the horizon. "That's Black Rock Port. Home," she said quietly. Boone came up beside her and stretched his arms. "Feels weird, like the calm after a bad dream. You wonder if it really happened or if you just drank something strong." "It happened. The witches are gone. The Tideborn god sleeps. And Jackson is a walking sea spell." Boone nudged Jackson playfully. "You still owe me a drink for dragging me into this mess. I saved your soul, and I saved your life during that eel fight in the trench." "Fair point." The crew laughed softly, the kind of laughter that only came after surviving the impossible. As the hollow star entered the harbor, the townsfolk on the shore froze. Then slowly, people began to gather. Men, women, children. Fishermen dropped their nets. Merchants climbed onto crates. Even the lighthouse keeper left his perch, squinting in disbelief. A child pointed. "It's the cowboy." Another whispered, "He's back from the cursed sea." The mayor of Blackrock, a thin man with spectacles and a quill behind his ear, stepped forward, stunned. "Jackson Kane?" The cowboy tipped his hat. "Been a while." As the crew disembarked, people pressed in, not to question, but to thank, to marvel. "Did you fight the sea witch? Is it true you walked inside a whirlpool?"
Is the pearl real? Did the ocean speak to you? Boone beamed, loving every second. "We fought 3 witches, a god, and a haunted eel." Ilara elbowed him. "You screamed louder than the eel." Jackson turned to the mayor. "The sea is different now. Safer. But it'll always have its secrets. We'll need more than fishermen. We'll need protectors." The mayor swallowed. "And who decides that?" Jackson looked toward the horizon. "The sea does." That evening, the town held a quiet feast. No fireworks, no banners, just good food, warm fire, and stories passed like sacred coins. Children gathered around Boone as he mimed sword fights with sea creatures. Ilara taught 3 girls how to disarm a pirate using only a belt and 2 fingers. Otis sat beneath a lantern, writing in a new journal, one bound in sea leather. And Jackson stood at the pier, watching the moonlight dance on the tide. Silas Kane, his father, walked up beside him. "I heard the tide sings now when you walk past it." Jackson smiled. "Only on Tuesdays." Silas nodded toward the sea. "Is she still out there?" Jackson asked. "The witches?" "No, but the sea remembers them. Their magic still lingers in the deep." "And the god?" Jackson looked out over the endless water. "He sleeps. For now." Silas laid a hand on his shoulder. "You did what I never could, son. You made peace with something no man understands." "I didn't make peace. I just listened." Silas smiled. "Then keep listening." Later that night, Jackson returned to the Hollow Star.
He found Boone asleep in the crow's nest, snoring with one boot off. Otis had fallen asleep mid-sentence, ink on his cheek. Elara stood at the helm, arms crossed, staring at the stars. "She's moving," she said softly. Jackson joined her. "The constellations?" "No," she whispered. "The tide. It's not just water anymore. It's like music." Jackson nodded. "You hear it too?" "Maybe." They stood there side by side, not needing to speak. The ship creaked beneath them. And from the distance, where the sea kissed the moonlight, a voice, not threatening, not ghostly, just curious, rose with the breeze. "Cowboy." Jackson didn't flinch. He just smiled. "I'm listening." It began with a gull, dead, dropped from the sky, feathers stiff and wings frozen in mid-flap. No wounds, no reason. Then came the wind, but it blew backward, from sea to land, stirring sand into trees, bending smoke into chimneys. Sailors tied down their boats in confusion. Farmers watched their crops ripple against nature's rhythm. Jackson stood atop the lighthouse, his eyes narrowed against the unnatural gusts. The pearl-branded sigils on his palms flared with heat. Something was wrong. Beside him, Otis gripped his staff with white knuckles. That isn't the sea's breath. That's something else, something trying to imitate it. Jackson stared at the horizon. The ocean wasn't moving. It was shuddering, like a living thing afraid of what crawled across its surface. Boone's voice crackled over the speaking shell from the holostar. "Jax, you might want to come down. We've got a situation." Jackson descended the spiral stairs in seconds. On the deck of the holostar, Elara pointed toward the sky. A spiral of black clouds spun in eerie silence, not rumbling like a storm should, but turning slowly, deliberately, like a waiting predator. Lightning flashed inside the cloud mass, but not white or blue, green. Otis gasped. "That's not lightning. That's energy, spell energy." Jackson clenched his fists. "But the witches are gone. Then someone else has taken their place, or something worse has been left behind," muttered Elara. Boone scanned the horizon. "It's not just the clouds. Look!" The sea was rising, not in waves, but in walls. Water stood up, held aloft by invisible forces, forming long ridges that began to circle the ship. They were being herded. Otis opened the orb at the helm. The map flickered erratically. Normally calm green dots now danced like frightened insects. And one, just one, blinked bright violet, pulsing with a rhythm none of them recognized. "I've never seen that color before," Otis whispered. Boone frowned. "What's it mean?" Otis met their eyes. "It means the sea doesn't know what this is." Jackson reached into the satchel at his side and pulled out the coral crown, now cracked. The pearl glowed dimly in his hand. Both relics seemed confused. Elara said, "If even the sea's relics don't recognize this thing, then we're not just facing leftover magic." "No," Jackson agreed. "We're facing something new." And then they heard it. A voice. Not one, many. Layered, male, female, ancient, young, in all languages and none. "You silence the deep, but something else heard the quiet. Something that was sleeping, waiting for the witches to vanish. And now, it wants the throne." The wind screamed suddenly. The sky turned deep emerald, and the sea itself split apart. From the rift emerged a figure, tall, robed in sails torn from drowned ships, with a head shaped like a cracked helm and eyes glowing like sea glass. Its body wasn't solid. It flickered like a mirage, like it was stitched from dozens of souls.
Otis gasped. Tydico.
What?
Boone shouted. A creature formed from the leftover will of the ocean's victims. Drowned sailors, sunken captains, broken gods, all pulled together into a single vengeful force. Ilara readied her weapons. It wants control. The Tydico raised one arm, and the hollow star began to rise, lifted on a swirling column of water, high above the ocean. Give us the crown, give us the pearl, give us the boy who bridged the sea, or drown beneath our memories. Jackson stepped forward. No. The creature screamed. A wall of green lightning exploded outward. The mast shattered. Boone was thrown across the deck. Otis raised a protective sigil just in time to shield Ilara. Jackson stood unmoved, his glowing hands pulsing with defiance. He shouted toward the sea, "I don't serve you. I don't serve witches. I serve balance. You want a throne? You'll have to go through me." The sea surged, the creature lunged, and Jackson met it head-on, fists raised, power ignited. The sky shattered with their clash. Somewhere beyond, deep in the ocean's old memory, the sea stirred again. Not with rage, with hope. The hollow star spun high above the sea, gripped in a cyclone of living water conjured by the Tydico. The deck groaned under the strain, ropes snapped, sails whipped and tore like paper. Yet in the eye of the storm, Jackson Kane stood unmoved, his pearl-branded palms glowing like stars. Across from him, the Tydico shifted and warped. One moment, it looked like a drowned pirate queen. The next, it was a child lost to the waves. Then an ancient sailor with coral-grown bones. Its form was a patchwork of suffering, an echo of all those the sea had taken and never returned. "You are not of the ocean," it hissed through 1,000 voices. "You do not belong." "I don't have to belong," Jackson said, taking a step forward. "I earned my place." He slammed his palm against the deck. The pearl's light flared. A burst of energy erupted outward, pushing back the storm, cracking the cyclone's spiral. Boone rolled across the tilted deck and slammed into a mast post, bruised but grinning. "Remind me not to play cards with you anymore," he muttered. Otis dragged himself upright beside Ilara. "Jax is holding it off for now. But that thing isn't just a creature. It's a wound, and wounds don't die. They spread." The Tydico twisted again, now tall and cloaked in salt and shadow. It raised both arms, summoning water forms from the storm, monstrous, eel-like serpents made from memory and magic. Ilara drew both her daggers. "Now this feels familiar." "Protect the helm," Jackson shouted. "I'll face the core." Otis, Ilara, and Boone rushed toward the spinning wheels, fending off the summoned horrors with blades, sigils, and explosive flares. Above them, lightning cracked, not from clouds, but from the open wound in the sky. Jackson advanced toward the Tydico. It lunged. They met in a clash of light and salt. Jackson ducked under a whip of watery tendrils, slid across the slick deck, and landed a pearl-charged punch to its midsection. The creature staggered back, screeching, not from pain, but from the force of recognition. "You carry what should have sunk. You wear the ocean's brand, but you speak with a landman's heart." "I speak for those who can't anymore," Jackson said, teeth clenched. The Tydico struck again, harder. Jackson blocked the blow, but his feet slid back several feet. His arms burned from the impact. "I know what you are," he said through the storm. "Your grief, your vengeance.
But you've forgotten something. The creature stopped. What? You're not the only memory here. And then Jackson did something strange. He closed his eyes, lowered his arms, let the ocean's wind whip through him, and listened. For a moment, the battle froze, the sea quieted, and a sound rose, soft, ancient, like a lullaby sung by the waves themselves. The voices of those lost at sea, mothers, fathers, sailors, dreamers. They whispered not with hate, but with peace. The tide echo trembled. Its form began to fracture. You called them? Jackson opened his eyes. I didn't call them. They came. Because they're not yours. Not anymore. He lifted his arms, and the sigils on his hands flared brighter than ever before. The pearl in his chest pulsed once, twice, and then burst into a halo of pure sea light. The tide echo screamed. It began to unravel, streams of memory spinning off like threads in a storm, vanishing into mist, as faces once twisted in rage now softened, fading into the wind like stories finished at last. The cyclone collapsed. The hollow star dropped, but not to crash, to land. The sea caught her gently. The storm was over. The silence returned. Not heavy now, but light. Jackson collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, water dripping from every part of him. Ilara rushed to his side. You okay? I've been worse. He smiled faintly. Boone helped Otis up, surveying the deck. Tell me that's the last sea ghost thing we're fighting. Otis just grinned. For now. That night, the hollow star drifted peacefully. Otis meditated beside the helm, whispering thanks to the waves. Boone made dinner, badly. Ilara stitched torn sails with a fishing needle, humming a song from her homeland.
And Jackson sat at the edge of the deck, feet dangling above the sea. From deep below, a faint shimmer rose, the glow of the sleeping pearl, returned to the ocean where it belonged. A soft voice drifted on the breeze, not angry, not vengeful, just a whisper. Thank you. Jackson smiled. I'll be here, just in case. Morning arrived with a quiet so deep it seemed as though even the seagulls chose to whisper. The sea sparkled beneath the first golden rays, its surface smoother than it had been in decades. The hollow star bobbed gently on that peaceful tide, scarred but proud, like a veteran of an ancient war. Jackson Kane stood at the bow, staring out at the endless blue, the salt breeze brushing through his hair. His hands, marked by the pearl's sigils, now pulsed faintly, more like a heartbeat than a storm. Boone approached, carrying 2 chipped mugs of seaberry tea. No explosions, no curses, no shrieking sea witches. I almost don't trust it. Jackson chuckled, accepting the mug. That's the problem with peace. You keep waiting for it to end. Otis joined them, leaning on the railing, his old sea cloak wrapped tightly around him. It's not just quiet, it's clean. The sea feels light again, as if it exhaled for the first time in centuries. Ilara emerged from below deck with a bundle of maps and charts. We could sail east to the Ember Islands. No monsters there, just red coconuts and beaches so warm the sand sings. Boone perked up. Coconuts sound very heroic. Let's do that. But Jackson wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on a distant ripple in the water, a lone shimmer that danced across the horizon. I think it's time, he said softly. Otis straightened. Time for what? Jackson turned to them. For me to go back, not home, deep. where the pearl came from, where it sleeps now. I'm not just a bridge for this world, I'm its guardian, and that means staying close to what needs guarding. Ilara frowned. You want to leave? Jackson nodded. The sea chose me for a reason. I don't think it's done with me. Boone looked down at his boots. So, what, you dive into the depths and vanish like some legend? Jackson smiled. Only if you tell the story right. They returned to Black Rock Port one last time. Crowds welcomed them again, this time not with awe, but with belonging. The hollow star had become a symbol. Songs were sung of the Cowboy of the Abyss. Children carved toy versions of the ship. Old sailors spoke of tides behaving again, ships coming home that had been lost for years. But Jackson didn't stay. On the third night, he gathered his coat, his hat, and stood once more on the edge of the moonlit dock. Boone clapped him back. You sure about this? Jackson gave a half grin. As sure as I was when we first left, except this time, I know who I am. Otis handed him a vial, a small flickering light inside. One drop of memory, should you ever want to remember us in full clarity. I won't need it, Jackson said, placing the vial in his coat anyway. You're already burned into my bones. Ilara approached last. She held something in her hand, a carved token in the shape of the hollow star. A piece of the mast, for luck. Jackson accepted it gently. Thanks, Cap. You were the real captain. They shared a long look, full of storms and laughter and close calls. Then Jackson turned toward the sea. He walked into the tide like a man returning home. Each step shimmered. The water didn't resist, it welcomed. By the time he reached waist deep, his body began to glow faintly. The sigils on his palms lit the ocean around him. The sea swirled upward, not to drown him, but to carry him. A wave, gentle and shimmering, rose beneath his feet, lifting him not down, but across, further and further from shore, until he was a distant silhouette under the moon. And then, with a final glint of light, he was gone.